this computer. Okay. And I have to go back to Zoom. So can you see the presentation? Can you see the presentation? And what is in Zoom? No, cannot see. What shall we do? Because I didn't share screens, of course. What is the? I don't have. Step one. I have Zoom there. I have Zoom. I'm out of Zoom now. I'm sharing the screen, right? So stop sharing the screen. Now share screen again. I don't have the Keynote. That's tough. Well, I should practice with the screens before coming to class. Let me try again. Share screen. Keynote. Okay, now you see Keynote, but you will not see the full screen. Oh, now you should see it. It was so tough. Okay, so this is on request of Uri Junhyun. Wow. So we had already one talk on sketching. Actually, the lecture is huge, and I will select a few slides to show in class. But you remember last time we spoke say 3 basic functions of sketching, right? Kind of a knowledge of reality, idea exploration, and idea communication. Number 3 is what you have to do for your presentations. But I think you're mostly struggling with 2, sketching as a way to look for ideas. And actually, the image we used of Norman Foster was very much that idea of thinking sketches, right? And this is section elevation. So actually, we saw some of them. So I collected some sketches from people since Michelangelo to Peter Zumthor, just about on time, by time. So this is a Michelangelo sketch, and this is a quotation I found. If you knew how much work went into it, you would not call it a genius. This is Michelangelo speaking of himself. And this has nothing to do with thinking and sketching. It has to do with the idea that even if you're a genius, you have to work hard to have results. There's no way out of it. And the next quotation is the one we are interested in. Is draw, 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 and don't waste time. You can change Antonio by any of your names. Yeah, draw G1, draw G1, draw, and don't waste time writing. Okay. And Michelangelo was sculpture, was not a painter, but even being a sculptor, drawing was so vital to understand reality, to know how things are. Sometimes sketches on the left, and to organize his own sculpture, right? So these are sketches remaining from one of his projects. I think this is the how to call it, the most relief. Well, there is some annotations, of course, and some diagram under. But you see this very rough sketch, just having a basic idea of 3 spans with some columns which are sculptures, and then some in between spaces, playing with the shape and proportions. And again, this is thinking sketch, a bit more defined on one of the parts. So you can see on the bottom, it's like a burial, like a memorial burial. And you can see already one idea of a moss in the center. And by pencil, he just defines, as soon as he's taking decisions, he defines a bit more and he starts really giving shape to elements. Working the details, right? And I think these are instructions for the query, I think. Well, the architectural details, actually, they have to save papers, so he tried to make most of the information in section, plan, perspective. And you have the finished thing, right? So you can see that it has been a process to the finished project. I couldn't find the whole process, but these did not come instantly, right? The lower part is very easy to recognize from the first sketches, but it all starts with an outlining of the idea and a basic idea on how things will be in the future. Sir Johnson is somebody we saw already, interesting British architect. And this is taken from Wikipedia, from the museum, sorry, Sir Johnson Museum. So it was actually his skill in drawing which made him his way into architecture when he was totally unknown and had not any kind of connection. And well, Johnson, late 18th, early 19th century. There's like a peak of neoclassic architecture in Britain, but it was mostly mixing styles. And I think this is the drawing that made call the attention on him at age 23. It's not just a bridge, complex architecture ability he had to develop. Also the atmosphere of the drawing and the way he used the illustration you see on the bottom right, like I can put here, that area, that he's actually sharing the plans of the building, right? So he has very nice knowledge, and these kind of ruins are actually the very detailed molding which would go into that bridge. It's kind of romantic, but okay, that brought him to the world of architecture. And this is some of his sketches I can find. This is all online. You can go to the museum or some online database. But you see, I don't know when, well, this is 1809. So he was already quite mature and experienced. But you see, this is not a finished drawing, by far not as much as the perspective we saw before. They're just thinking plan, section, elevation, image, all at the same time with annotations. This is what with dimensions, always with proper proportions. And at times giving shades or hatches just to see the difference of the spaces and to have not just the cold geometry. See, for example, the use of textures. I don't know if this is a floor or one stair. Also the giving the interior design of the rooms, right? And giving depth to elements. So this is like really thinking beyond just the pure geometry of where the walls are, trying to imagine the real building. Another example for one facade. Of course, this is a very trained hand, so almost without any help, the proportions are almost perfect. But you see there's no details, because that will come later. Now it's kind of organizing the main image of the building, using shades to have an idea of the depth, the volume, and so on. Again, it's more than just geometrical definition of elements. Another beautiful example of a section, again, clearly a study of top light. This might be some study for his own museum, I guess. this is already quite detailed with the dimensions and with some kind of construction understanding and so on. An example of details and so on. Let's go a bit more into our century. So this is a comment on this architect, just a controlled but expressive gesture of the hand on paper. Actually, we would explore the possibility of the built reality. So hand on paper is more than just the lines. It is your own physical experience, right? But that brings us to the built reality, right? So we have to have always that imagination of how will be the real thing in our mind, and then we will be able to draw it. This is Rudolf Schwarz. He died the same year I was born. And he was actually one of the great German architects of the 20th century. He worked a lot in the reconstruction of Cologne after the war. And he, like many Germans, worked within charcoal on this quite large size drawing. It gets close to expressionism, to which Germans are quite good. And you can see the real thing is not exactly that, but the sketch is already going for kind of a structural and expressive image of the building based on the structure, right? It is the arcs which create those big openings, but the arcs are themselves very massive. And well, this is only floor plan, but I bring this because one interesting comment Professor Song had last week when she showed all the models and told you need to test a lot of things to see how the idea works. Of course, it is testing not randomly many spare and the random ideas, but exploring one idea to see how it can work. So that exploration is not having 100 options or 20 options, but just the idea you're looking for, how it works. This is obviously a very long building. In all cases, right? We understand it's a long building with a large opening or heavy and light walls and the side element, which maybe it is because of the site itself. And then a bit more elaborate. So we understand this kind of opening on the side. It is a religious space. This is already almost final sketch. But when you go to the build work, actually it's quite consistent with the ideas in the sketches. And we understand these buildings more than just a few walls. And the magic of the space is the light. This is more known. And it's interesting because Aalto was very good at drawing, but actually he's speaking for painting. And we have quite a few painters, architects, probably the most famous is Le Corbusier, which used painting to explore shape and color and depth without the constraints of architecture. And Aalto actually was very much interested in a Cubism art, Picasso, Braque, and that developed a very unique style of architecture, not of drawing. And Aalto was also quite old. He was born 1898, was the year of the Taft agreements between the United States and Japan, in which they decided Korea will be for Japan and Philippines and Cuba would be for the United States. That was an agreement between Japan and the States. So it's not a coincidence that 1988 was the war in the Philippines and Cuba, and the Japanese started to really enter Korean life. This is the sketch I showed the other day. It's almost real size. In reality, it's a bit bigger. of the initial drawings for William Idea. This is a published part. This is also one of the early sketches. And you can see in the same page, topography with a building in the hill in terms of a very basic idea of 2 floors and some vertical element, floor plan with a full garden, and then the wings of the house, and some idea of the hill around, some idea of elevation, right? And you see, it's not those mechanical walls and the floors, roofs you usually make in your sketches. It's like a really thinking the real building. And see, even a very early sketch have hatches. You have even a suggestion of pavement, right? To tell this is a paved area against the open garden. Or you're giving shades to give an idea of volume. And again, this is like a very, very early drawings. A bit more advanced, and but when you or the architect is going into details, again, small parts are studied, and you can see already probably stairs, structure, suggestion of windows, connecting spaces, the exterior, and then simultaneously section views, perspectives, the calculation of the stairs to see if they fit, and many other things, right? So you're really thinking in the real building, and those drawings are only trying to put on paper what is in your head. Let's go back, and this is clear, right? Every architect should learn to write music. Who can write music here?
No.
Okay, everybody else go to school and learn music. Why? Because it is very clear for musicians that writing is not the music itself. It's just a symbol of the music. Whereas architects, silly us, we think the drawing is architecture. And it's not. The drawing is just like the symbol, as the notation is the symbolism of the music. So this is where the following sentence comes. An architect must be able to read the life that comes into his works through his plans, right? To read the life, not the plans themselves. Plans are just symbols. And this is where the effort of all architects we saw till now to go beyond just those lines, to express the depth, the volume, the perception of those spaces, or the materiality of those buildings, even in those very early stages. And this was, of course, Uri Luis Kahn, who was born 1901. Look at this century's guy. And he died because of overwork. Already 73, but that's a bit early to die. He had heart attack. No, in the toilets of the station, it's even worse. So they found him much later. And this is some of his sketches, right? He, of course, produced a lot of drawings, and his process was very slow and very iterative until he found a solution. I'm not sure if this is one of the Unity temples, but you can see here many of the ideas which Kahn uses, like those very solid elements, that center space with a top light, and in between elements was also very unique way of lighting, and an effort to show or to give the human scale and how buildings are used. And then plenty of sketches trying to refine and to find out how those elements would work. This is from the famous Kimbell Art Museum in Texas. And this is already advanced in the design, the detail of the famous vaults. And I think it was okay, easy. He had those vaults with light and this very basic starting design. But actually, it was not so obvious because having vaults with the opening on the top, letting the light from the top, with combination of natural, indirect, and the artificial light was very complex. And there is plenty of studies of which some are published. Right? Different ways to make this light into the building. And again, these are thinking drawings in section about one detail of the building, important. And you see little by little the solution going on, but it was not so obvious. Actually, it was a big effort to find out, even this one is not the final one, the solution. Well, we all know. James Stirling, he comes often in our class, probably 1926. He's a really young guy. Also died young, both because of overworking and over drinking. Careful with alcohol. So this is a bit long but interesting, because he actually thought by drawing, and this is one of the most extreme cases. And especially conceptual sketches, it's not the concept of the typical, my concept is whatever, but what is giving shape to the building from the beginning. This kind of the starting point of what is important in one project. Right? So he used like a lead. This is the typical Yonpil, right? For just the basic relation of space and then color to express materiality. I didn't bring color pencil drawings here, but we saw some of who brought Tate Gallery drawings. Right? That's a lot of color. This is in blue is a James Stirling quotation, but here's a hard, spare, restrained, scientific. That means the drawing is just the minimum as necessary. It's not the drawing itself. To scale. And that's amazing because he was able to make any kind of a sketch, and the sizes were and the proportions were really correct. Right? And as accurate as the hand and eye can make. Right? But then just the minimum to convey the maximum of information. So minimum drawing, maximum of information. That's quite interesting comment. And actually any work of Stirling from the concept to the construction drawings is very interesting to see process, because he was really he had a very natural talent for architecture. There are people who has a very fast intuitive vision of how things work, and that was one of those was Stirling. James, as myself, and also James. So this is some of the sketches of one beautiful building. This is the dormitories in Oxford. And you see that mix of axonometric diagrams. Of course, this is like a rooms and corridors. You see one reference to Alvar Aalto. So it's already, the building was built in 1971, but the sketches started in the 1960s. Section with the image, the glass, connection bridge, there was some kind of technical image, some connection space with those common spaces for the coffee shop or the canteen and so on. Section, site diagram with it is in front of the stream or river, so you have the views and so on. Some numbers, no idea what is it. I don't know why so many and why the 666 comes in here. And this is probably by the size of the drawing, maybe A4 typical sketch pad, right? Not a big paper. It's a bit more matured, but you see how always we have a section, plan, diagram, another section, then other sketches around there, right? So there's a constant work to define little by little how things are. Of course, from the last sketch, many things are already decided, like this beautiful section going little by little in steps with a very vertical, thin and narrow divisions of glass, with corridors on the back, Then you have an idea, you have corridors every 2 floors. This is really, really exploration. Okay, how you can intertwine different stairs and have this kind of arc and so on like it. That's a section of continuous stair. So you go floor by floor. Instead of those stairs going up and down, right? Having a stair which goes continuously, which is a subject that Sterling used very often because he was fascinated with the stairs and this kind of endless way up instead of just returning and turning and turning. There's more sketches with the finished building. And this is already a color sketch. You see how the colors help to define movement areas, some green roof, and some other elements. So there's a clear geometry over which large elements and then gestures are included. This is the communication area, right? Probably lobby, I don't know what is still in there. Access by cars, probably this is the parking access and so on, right? And a section which still is not complete, but yes, we can see that there is an access of cars to the lower parking. And probably this area is the roof of this parking. But probably Stahl's Gallery is one of the most famous. And actually, I think Junhyun wrote it. If we see the aerial view, it's like almost obvious, right? It's like a very classical wing in U with this square, which is the connection of the front and the back, and then the terms of dimension under it. It is so simple that it seems silly. But actually, this was really a long and difficult process. Sterling at that time did his office, did 3 competitions in Germany, in Cologne, in Düsseldorf, and Stuttgart. And they won Stuttgart. But each competition was kind of a practice for them to get more familiar with the case of the devastated German towns. And in this case, we have a really, not a street, but really a highway in front of the building, a classical building, which I think is part of the gallery also, and then a more humanized, of course, public buildings, but with a humanized area, more urban area with the trees and so on. So this empty plot was in a very difficult in-between spaces. And obviously, James Sterling thought on the connection, right, to have this kind of nice pedestrian access, and the building itself being part of the museum, but having also plenty of open space for the citizens to be both a way, a path, and a landmark, and a node at the same time. So I think, well, this is from a publication in which the author analyzes this work. This might be one of the first sketches. And you see that the final wasn't so obvious, right? But it is clear square, right? With a circle in the middle. Then something which looks like a section, a connection to the building. Then individual elements, one section, trying to organize how those things work. Very elaborate entrance, which actually it was the important point. Some symbols, some section of the whole museum, and some idea on how this space could work. You know, this is the starting point, and it is really far from the result. But see how the proportions are very clear in terms of section, in plan. This could be almost put to scale, right? And would be almost perfect. That's the ability of Sterling, a very educated hand. He was very, very good at drawing. And then we have endless series of drawings in which little by little we have a access area, the famous guitar of Le Corbusier, right? Which separates and also links that plaza with columns and the difficulty of having ramps to connect the areas. And little by little defining some kind of in-between space, right? And also trying to how would I say, to solve the program of the rooms you need. So at time he just is using like a classical courtyards with some intermediate space along the courtyard, course, right, circulation. You see the axonometric, beautiful drawing of that ramp going up, which is the key, with a separate access for the building from inside. Very accurate sections again, right? But that section is nothing, you see the numbers, checking if it is possible to go up that huge level difference, right? And how you can have, again, a very nice, comfortable circulation inside. Ideas for this plaza and for the ramp and so on. Well, I will not comment one by one, but you see how, as the process goes, it goes from detail to the complex, and we have always plans, axonometrics, diagrams all together. What I just commented at this stage, this is tiny, but look the use of pavement just to demonstrate public plaza space. And then only diagrams of volume and trying again, the movement of the public with the movement of the entrance, dividing the building in two, but also joining them, right? And finally, the unified building, or the drawing only of the central elements, ignoring the rest. So in one page, you have like a details, the whole building and different options. But you see, this is not random production of alternatives. It's like a really going deep into the best way to solve that very simple idea of circulation. Well, it goes on. You see again the effort to make this path, but again, now we have a courtyard, seeking the hatches to show the exterior spaces, and already we have some image of the materiality of the walls also. So little by little, the building is taking shape, right? Like this U element and this central square, and the whole process from the street to the back forest. See also the strategy of drawing only the ramp, right, in cases, or the ramp with the complex, and having a different vision of the section over there, the diagrams, of exploring only details, for example, and then testing in the full building. Then interesting notes. This is nice because FLW, I would say it is Frank Lloyd Wright, and the end of conversation. So rhetoric, symmetry, I cannot, Pictorian, right? Invention, quotation. So it's like a very few, one of the few drawings in which you have some text. But you see that the idea is little by little taking shape. Now we can see we have a clear auditorium element, and we have like just the individual interior spaces, how they relate, and then how they are compound in the full set. Then details of the access, a bit more defined. See again the use of pavement just to demonstrate the different qualities of a space. And then at this, as it is proceeding, you get more. This is probably 1 to 500 or 1 to 200 scale drawings. Again, solving small areas. This is all the connections between that square, the auditorium, the access, right? And the difficulty of the ramps always, and the secondary lobby for the auditorium, which needs a different entrance. Like keeping always a double circulation, the exterior and the interior at a different level. So quite intelligent to draw only the circulation in space, for example. Very often, especially Studio 1 and 2, I ask you to just define only the circulation in space. Well, that was the idea behind it. You draw only the circulation and then you put against the building. So not being distracted with other things, you can really see how that space alone works. And then you put all the, you compose all the necessary elements you need to complete the building. And again, well, this is endless, right? But this is a development. And this is a point in which I call your attention over knowing very well the program. Because at this time, you know very well the space you need for the lobby, the independent access for the auditorium with the connection space, and those smaller rooms, right, which will really complete the configuration of the space. You cannot guess, so you have to know what is going in each of the areas, and then you can really organize the building itself. And then you have a building. Of course, I brought only the concept sketches and the initial stages. But if you go to the final drawings, you can understand very well the reason of all those things. Fumihiko Maki, my professor. And this is taken also from some quotations. Actually, he always cite and program are essential, and then materials and technologies, right? Actually, I worked in his office a short time for a competition. So the first thing I do is to understand the problem, to see the site, and then to find a basic grid by which I can organize the structure, which is about site and program, some kind of a basic scale of the building, right? But not only that, how can you deal with society's needs and desires, right? So it's like the very technological and very technical with some concern for really people using the buildings and the impact of the buildings in the city. Born 1928, now he's 93. Am I right? Yes, still working. Yes, he's 93 and he's still working. Because he has very healthy life. Well, I visited last time him when he was probably 84. And at 84, he knew all the projects perfectly. And well, I visited him in his office, and we were in the lower floor where all people are drafting. So, oh, wait a minute. He went blah, 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 upstairs. He returned with a lot of roll papers. I didn't show this. Our first project in China, you look. Come on, guy. Usually you would say, call and bring me the drawings. No, he was himself like, look. But he said, you know, my wife is already a lot at home, so I try to finish at 8 or so we have dinner together. So this is from his publication of 2015. I think it was 50 years of his office, yeah, 6 years ago. So it's a collection of sketches, and I chose as many as I could from sections, elevations, basic ideas to try to understand the size of a building, right? So this size, the shape, actually, is like from very basic idea on the top to a bit more defined in the bottom. But you see that, well, these are very different stages, right? In the top, you can see ideas of movement, of light, of exterior interior spaces, and such connections. In the bottom, which is drawn in the plane from Tokyo to Houston. I think that that building is a Pennsylvania history agency building for research. It's already working on the facade, but it's a thinking drawing, right? You have an old glass block, you have some dimensions, right? So you can see these 3 floors, you see a big entrance, you see the partition of the facade, but still it is soft enough to be rethought. well, some of the projects. I think the right is black tape, I told you. Tegon put his drawings with black tape, and it was a bad idea. On the right, I think is the lobby of the Kyoto Museum of Modern Art. Again, just the space of the stair, the scale, and so on. I think this is from San Francisco Yerba Buena Gardens, which is a building which we're doing when I was in his office briefly. So they had the models and they were starting the construction drawings. But this is a more advanced sketch. Actually, this is a building which is over an existing building. So this was a very crazy infrastructure of a large underground parking and so on. So the buildings were on top of it. This is Arata Isozaki, Museum of Modern Art of San Francisco, and this is a bit lighter art center. And some of the photos I could find, not so many because not easy to photograph, but I brought this because everybody remembers the stereo space. If you see the sketches, this is both elevation section, and that idea of the lobby's continuous space actually is one of the things that went into the final design. See, again, nothing is designed, but you have a very clear idea of the scale of people using the space, of connections, of exterior, interior, right, alternate scales, and even some kind of, I don't know, it is windows or some kind of rhythm and so on. And you see, all have very different styles. Also, being a same generation, Maki and Sterling had very similar style of sketching. But Maki is very much a fountain pen. Sterling was much more pencil by. I brought something totally different. Aldo Rossi, which is of the 1997, he died in a car accident. So be careful with cars. And again, Aldo Rossi was not the super talented architect. He's more known for his theory and his drawings, but his drawings were interesting because he qualifies as a painter architect. And actually, he was very much fascinated by those Italian Renaissance painters or early Baroque painters, in which he's almost surrealistic. So he makes buildings as objects as buildings. So you can see a coffee pot, it's a tower. And he has also industrial design. So he has coffee pots which look like small buildings you put on your table. And his thinking drawings are very much always elevation plan, but mostly perspective, right? It's like a dreams of the spaces with simultaneous perspectives. Actually, this is not a final presentation. You see, this is the floating theater of Venice. And sometimes the drawings are just hung as a painting. So his way of thinking, you see plans, elevations, sections, but his way of thinking was mostly axonometric. And again, with a very strange feeling of a scale. Sometimes we don't know if he's just doing the painting or really designing, but actually you can see the context of the building and the section of the building itself. Right. You can see how absolutely all architects we saw always put numbers. They always are very aware of the dimensions and proportions, right? This is something we cannot avoid. Buildings have a dimension and we understand them in relation to our body dimension. And of course, we have a limited sight and technology. What happens? The real buildings are very much like their drawings. So it's like an over-scaled toy. Again, some people think this is fantastic masterpiece. It was very, very trendy when I entered the school, and I didn't like it. So you have to, but some of my professors were fans, so I had to read his books and study his works because this was exam material. But again, the way you draw actually defines very much how you build. And this was his idea, like the very abstract like the basic typology, right? Like the essence of the building, which is just columns, square windows, and a triangular roof, but a little bit like almost a caricature, like a comic, like not real. And we end with Peter Zumthor. And I think this is very close to what we saw with Alvar Aalto, sorry, Luis Kahn, which the drawings refer to a reality which lies still in the future, right? So the drawings are not nothing by themselves. It's like something which is still in the future of the building which will be built. And this is what you must have in your head. And then he goes further with another statement which I don't have here. Actually, I selected only these slides for Junghyun, but then I thought it was a good idea to put more drawings and more architects to have more context, to see how different they all are and how much they have in common. Of course, this is already Haraboji, but it's the youngest of the whole collection we saw. And probably Zumthor is the most minimalistic. He uses just pastel or Conte bar because you cannot detail at all. And I think this is his point of the design, just not detailing, having just the big elements. And of course, this is not a sketch. This is a representation of finished work, but also the way he represents the summary or the main idea of his buildings is very consistent with the way of sketching. Like this set of voids, solids, but solids with voids inside in a sequence. Again, with the interesting creation of in between spaces, right? Which are very much in a sequence. And then very clever connections between those different elements, right? Keeping distance or having connections in which you always have the individuality of each element. And you have a nice connection. Well, you could think on a lot of ways of understanding this project. But what is interesting is that it is very consistent between minimalistic and avoiding all kind of details. We know only stairs, solids, and voids, and some landscape. Then, of course, the building will have much more details. But this is very much Zumthor's way of working. This is, again, very intelligent way to show what is against the ground. You don't draw the retention wall as you do often at school, but it's just a solid, the mountain. So you draw the full solid as it is. You don't mind what is behind because you only see the final wall, right? The openings in front, with usually some space in between, right? Main rooms being open to those gardens. So there's always something in between that. Wait. Well, I don't remember which project it is, but really nice representation. And also section minimalistic, almost nothing. And this is the final set of 3. I don't know what happened with this project, but it's obviously along one river, which goes to a larger river. This could be Chungmangchong to Hangang, for example. We have like a bridges and the site with little more than a widening of the water area. And then obviously here he has no idea what to do, right? But in terms of design, but it is very clear that you have a big platform. Let's change the color to something stronger. A big platform next to the water, and the tower is something floating on top of that, right? With things happening, whatever. And this is probably the context around. And this is the idea which then you have to make into a real building. And with that idea, you define, again, see the interest of having different scales, of showing the transparency of the glass, but glass with a thickness, and then the structural floors with a very realistic scale. At this stage, it is very much what we saw with the Sterling or Mackie or whoever, even John Soane, right, or Michelangelo, the sense of scale and dimension is very accurate, right? So probably you could even measure to scale and would be not very far from the real thing. It's not about precision, it's about being realistic about the scale, because you have like two sets of spaces interlacing in diagonal, right? So it's some kind of central core and open areas to the sea and so on. And probably more details on how this works. And I think this is the last drawing we have, but I guess it is enough to demonstrate the point on how important it is to sketch not just floor plans and sections, but understand the buildings is dimensional. So you have to work in all possible ways. James Sterling was obviously very much a floor plan guy, but he always made like those axonometrics, those sections, those spaces, trying to imagine how the real thing was. And the same happening with all other architects. So the last quotation is important because very much Peter Zumthor. So I keep working until the sketches reach the delicate point of representation when the prevailing mood I seek emerges. Right? So when, again, you have an aim, so you're seeking for something, it's not random, but then you find the mood, and then I stop, because then I reached. Otherwise, we will start doing many details which distract us, and we will just go into the details and not into the real thing. Of course, this is very much Peter Zumthor, but you can see that this actually happens in almost every architect we saw with architects. Right? Even Aldo Rossi, which is probably the less able as architect, not useless, but really it was a different level of architectural ability, was very much in this seeking a special mood and not getting too much lost in small details, right? You see that none of those sketches has the rooms with the doors opening like this, right? Or the typical door box. Right? You will see in Sterling the rotation doors because that marks the entrance. But in rooms, you will see just an indication of where's the entrance. Or in the case of Rudolf Schwarz, just an opening, right? Giving an impression of how things work. This is just decorating the drawing to make it look technical, worked, but something which is not helping to really design. Okay, so this is it. Is there any question? It was only 40 minutes, I expected. It was fast. Well, it took some time to set up, but it was almost 1 hour talking. 1 hour and 3 minutes. Questions, comments? Not that I see. Okay, so let's stop it here. I will stop the Zoom now, so the rest of the class may come on their time. Okay, goodbye.